It's recorded, but I can always go over other stuff. So anything you've ever wanted to know about being an academic librarian, general, kind of few years experience, so I can talk a little about whatever.
Okay. I have audio now. So
wonderful. All right. Do we want to close the door, or I mean, with the concert going on, I don't think it's going to be a problem with us disturbing people. So.
Nick was just changing.
And make sure everyone, if you want pizza, we got some drinks. Hello.
I'm back.
Well, welcome back. Come grab some pizza, grab some drinks. You guys are actually going to see old cover letter, work in progress, and an old submission one for this really old position from 2005. I figured I'll use real life examples because I have them. It's in my email. I might as well just pull it up.
Can you also talk about your educational background, like your stories of how you got?
How to become a librarian?
Yes.
Sure. All right. Are we all set on recording?
Yes.
All right. So we'll start off. Hello, my name is Christina Schwobel. I'm an academic librarian here at USC. I'm the science librarian for a number of the different liaison areas in the sciences. I won't name them because that'll take a half an hour. So I'm just going to be talking on different stuff related to being an academic librarian, searching for jobs, doing other things like that, just random stories that have nothing to do with anything else. And I do like to mention, I'm not a lawyer, I am not an accountant, I am not a human, I am a human. I'm not an HR specialist, that's what I was trying to talk about. My brain's gone for the day already, sorry. So everything I say is my own opinion, not representing the university, blah, 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 all that lawyer talk. All right, that being said, hi. All right, so I'm going to start off just talking, well, before I get into this, so let's talk about how I became a librarian. So I started off as an English and German major, and I was at Butler University, and about sophomore, going into junior year, I was sitting there going, what am I ever going to do with this, right? I don't necessarily want to go into teaching, which is hilarious because I teach now and I love it. Whole nother story. But what am I doing? And so I was talking with my dad one day, and I'd done classes trying to figure out, you take all those tests and say, what exactly are you good at? And none of them were really helpful. So I was talking to my dad, and he's like, well, you own a library, you catalog your books for fun, you live at the library, why don't you just become a librarian? And I was like, I didn't know that was an option. So guess what? You can become a librarian. Isn't that great news? So I did that, finished up, and I actually almost got a minor in computer science just for fun. I randomly took a C++ programming class because it looked interesting. Aced it, the professor taught me no more, but I figured it's not worth going another year for just a minor when I already have two majors. So when I became a librarian or went to library school, I did a specialization in technology. And so that's something that you want to look at is look at something that's interesting to you. So you don't have to just take the library courses, but is there a specialization? Are there extra classes? Or is there some other areas? Because the great thing with being a librarian, you can incorporate that in. So I became a computer science librarian, and then I picked up an IT master's for fun, because I'm a masochist, apparently. And so I got to incorporate that in, and now I get to work with all these departments. I do some programming on the side just for fun again. So I'm currently writing a program that will hopefully be able to help with archives and some stuff like that. And so just all these random things that you get to do. So you get it not just to your job, but you can incorporate other things that you like into it, which is really fun because I love being a librarian. It's awesome. I get to help people and all kinds of stuff. So going off of that, once I got my MLS, Master's of Library Science, you have to find a job, right? So these are some of my things that I have from back in like 2005 or thereabouts. Where I started, I got one of my real job ads that I actually applied to. Oddly enough, this is actually in Western Carolina. So North Carolina, not quite South Carolina, but so I was close. All right. So I got this. So you're going to be looking at a lot of job ads. You're going to be looking at a lot of different other things. And so there's a few recommendations that I'm going to have starting off. So when you're doing that, you're going to want to start off with a resume, right? So you're going to have all kinds of things, and depending on what they're looking for, they might have different ideas for what you should do in a resume. So you should normally have all kinds of experience in education up here. Sometimes they want a summary. In this case, they wanted a summary of qualifications and objectives, and I'm going to put, like, what would I put here? You can kind of see my mind process. I'm thinking, all right, I have this, and then you're going to work with it. So the idea is you just kind of blurt out your whole life onto paper, right? You put down everything, every single thing you can think of. So you're going to put, okay, I worked, library information systems in Indiana, IU, and did all this stuff. You can put, like, here I did something with engineering projects. Library assistant, foreign language. You can put, other work experience. So I was at Sam's Club. I was at, at Usher, Clues. I did Old Navy, all this other stuff. So you just blurt every single thing that you've ever done in your life. Just put it all on paper, right? You don't have to organize it. The first thing is just try to remember anything you've ever done. Did you volunteer? Were you president of a club? Or, anything you can put on here. Now what you're going to do then afterwards is you're going to shape this into a master resume. And I call it a master resume because you want to have one resume that has every single thing you've ever done, and then you're going to edit that depending on the job that you're applying for. But it's always good to have that to fall back on, just like it's always good to have a list of all your old addresses, not just because then sometimes when you're doing like the credit history check or things like that, they're going to be like, did you ever live at this location? Like, I don't know. I had 5 apartments in Chicago. I might have. So it's good to keep some lists of some of these things, and so this master list is just good to say, okay, when did you work a certain location? Because after a while, you're probably going to forget the exact dates. You're going to forget when did you start, when did you leave, when were you maybe promoted, other things like that. So if you create that master resume and always update it. Even if you love your current job, even if you're really happy, everything's going great, keep it updated. You do a new presentation, put it on. You do a new task, you get a new liaison area, anything that you're adding should go on here. So you can have, all kinds of really things. And you can see this is, I pretty much just blurted myself out on here. And then you clean it up a little bit. So I'll show you a cleaned up version of a resume. If I can find where to put it. So here's my current one. So you cleaned up a little bit. I got education, got experience, all that experience, yay, blah, blah. This is what happens when you work a number of years, you get more pages in a resume. And then you have presentations. It's always good to have extra skills and things like that, too, to put on. And so then you clean it up, you put it in a nice format, you make it look pretty, because they like looking at something that's pretty. You also want to make sure that it's clearly easy to be read. So you don't want to have things where they're having to jump all over the page. You want to have where it's in one location. So they know, like here, they can always look in the same location to find out where the years are. And so you don't want to have where they're having to hunt for things, because it makes them really annoyed, because you're having, on a search committee, you're looking, the first step is you're going to be looking at anywhere from normally 25 to 300 or more resumes. Now some of this is screened out, and this is, everyone hates it, but a lot of times when you apply for a job, you have to type all this stuff in and then attach this. So I've had some people say, well, why do I need to bother attaching it then? I've typed it in. It's because they're going to 2 different groups. So the typed in stuff is what HR looks like. So they have some different algorithms and some different requirements to say, have they graduated? Yes, no. If no, dump it. Have they done this? Yes, no. If no, dump it. And so that's why you want to make sure when you're entering the information, you get that in there. And then you want to have this also shine, because this is then going to that search committee. And they're going to be the ones looking at this. And this is what we normally look at first. We'll read the cover letters, but we normally look through here first, because this is a really good way to see, are the skills that we need in here. I mean, some things are going to be mentioned extra in the cover letter, but you want to be able to highlight. So even if I left Sam's Club in here, and I could talk about what skills did you have, because reference desk, a lot of that is the person-to-person work, right? And so you need to be able to interact well with people. You need to have certain other skills, and so you don't want to leave that off. So that's going to be doing something valuable, just like as I was an usher at Clues Hall. So I could talk then about, then I got promoted and I then got put in charge of some other people. And so those are skills. So even though it's not going to be the same when you're working as a librarian, some of those skills are transferable. All those soft skills. And a lot of employers now are really looking at the soft skills, because those are the hardest skills to teach. Because you can teach almost anyone to program something. You can teach almost anyone how to find a book, right? But how do you teach people how to interact with people? It's really difficult. And so if that's not already kind of there, if you don't already have the desire a little bit, it's going to be really difficult. So it's good to highlight that you have those skills, and so that way even the weird, odd jobs can really bring some value when you're looking at that. And again, there's all kinds of different ways. You don't have to ever do exactly as I'm doing. I just realized my phone number's on there, so sorry, ignore that. Oops. All right. So yeah, you don't have to do exactly what I'm doing. So for instance, I just got in the habit now of where I try to summarize, because again, they may not look right at the cover letter first. They're going to normally look at resumes first. So I try to do a brief summary, so that way if they're not quite familiar with that position or with what I've been doing, they have a really good idea just up front about what my normal day-to-day tasks are. And that also takes it out a lot, because you don't want to put in here, I'm on the reference desk 6 to 10 hours. You don't want to put, I answer email chat or do ask chats or things like that. That's stuff that everyone's supposed to normally be doing, and some of it's covered. So I put general reference and research assistance and things like that. So it's not a bad idea to sometimes have a summary, but you want to encapsulate that in some way, just because otherwise this can be very valuable space, and you want to make sure that you're really highlighting some things that you feel are more accomplishments instead of just it's what I do every day. So, does that make sense? Wonderful. But again, master list, and then every single job you look at, you tailor that. So if you're looking at this position, you're going to say, okay, what are they looking at? This is a reference librarian. They're also going to be the environmental and geosciences liaison. So then you go ahead and look back at your resume and say, okay, based off what I know from here, what would I take off? What would I edit? What would I change? So always have that master list saved, but then have, okay, this is going to be my resume for the reference librarian at Western Carolina. And you always want to label them, because the last thing you want to do is send a resume to West Carolina that's labeled USC, or that's labeled Loyola, or on your cover letter say, Dear Loyola, if you're sending it to North Carolina. That's not going to look nice. It's going to give an impression that it's not one that you want to give. So it's always good to label the file name and then double check, because that way it's really easy to see, okay, here I can say cover letter for whoever, and then you just edit that before you email it. Or sometimes you leave it in. You just put, Western Carolina University, cover letter, Christina Schwabel. And that can be really long, so you can edit that a little bit too, but just something so you make sure you're not sending it to the wrong place, because that's bad. Also, if there's anyone where it's mentioned who the person is that you're working with, you always want to look at that too. So in this case, I know that it's, I'm just addressing it to the chair, or you can just address it to the committee as a whole. And again, you can put all kinds of different formats, spacing, however you want to make it pretty and make it look different. This is from 2005, so please don't judge. I know it's changed sometimes a little bit since then, but you always want to make sure they know who this is for. And if you go into multiple pages, make sure it says it on every single page. Header, footer, I don't care how you do it, but you always want to make sure in case any pages get shuffled by accident, and it's going to happen when you're working with over 25 cover letters and all kinds of things, so you want to make sure that there's clear branding on that to identify that this is you and separate you from everybody else. Because after a while, they all start looking the same, and they're like, well, does this have to go here, or was it with someone else? And that can make a difference. All right. So cover letter, you always want to kind of say, well, you're going to want to talk about yourself. So you want to talk about, okay, here's the job that I'm applying for, just in case you've forgotten. Highly doubt you forgot, but it's not a bad idea to mention, I'm interested in this position. You're going to talk a little bit about, you've looked at some of the job information. You've looked at the university, and you should always actually look at that. That's actually one of the ways where I was weeding out some jobs to apply for, because I was looking at web pages. I know there was one that was like hot purple and pink and all weird and formatted very incorrectly. I was like, I can't even work there. I just can't do it. Especially when I was talking to them, and they're like, oh, no, this is great. I'm like, nope. No, that's out. Sorry. It's like, no. And it gives me a seizure looking at your website. I'm not able to work for you. So you want to review their specifications. You want to do research before you're applying for this. Now, I know a lot of times, especially as a new graduate, you just want a job. And that's the funny thing, because, right, they're all like, well, why specifically did you choose such and such university or such and such job? Like, because I want money, right? I have bills, I have student loans, they're not paying themselves. So you're really going to want to look and say, why are you interested? So of course you're interested because it's in your field, because hopefully you're interested about the position itself. And it's not bad sometimes to be a little bit honest and say, well, you know, I just graduated, I'm looking for a position to get started. But you also do want to show some interest. So even if you just pick one random thing about the university that you really like. So maybe you like the mission statement, maybe you like some of the values, maybe you love their football team. I mean, I don't know, just pick something that connects you a little bit. Because the last thing you want to do is be insincere, and you also want to be true to yourself in here. You do not want to send a cover letter that does not represent how you talk, how you act, or who you are as a person. Because I often say, what you're looking for is a job that matches the same kind of weird that you are. Everyone's weird in a way, right? So you just need something that matches that weird, not just the crazy. So, or crazy in my case. So you're going to look at that. You're going to talk about what kind of experience you've gained. And it's always good to look at the job ads and to pick out specific things that they're looking for. So if you know that you have specific instances, talk about it. Say, I've demonstrated this. And some of that will come later, too, in interviews or in other things like that. But you want to go ahead and say, all right, have you demonstrated knowledge of something? So in this case, I've talked about, knowledge of math. So I can talk about my time working at the Geography Math Library and say, I've learned some of these skills. And maybe I didn't have a chance to learn that yet, but I'm proficient in these other technologies, and I'm able to pick up things quickly. And so it's good to address not just what you can do, but also what you're lacking. And that's something that I do want to mention too. So most job ads, when you're looking at them now, entry-level job positions are all asking for 5 years of experience, right? So pretty much they all want 5 years or more. What's really weird is when you're looking at computer science positions, because sometimes they're asking that and the programming language aren't even 5 years old yet, but they want you to have 5 years of experience. So it's that way with every job position. All people want 5 years of experience, speak 5 languages, do all these tests. It's not going to happen. So do not feel afraid to apply for jobs where you do not feel 100% qualified. The nice thing is most times you will be taught or you can learn about some of the things. There are exceptions. So, please don't go for nursing if you don't have or doctor if you haven't got a medical degree. Just say it, or at least warn me before I'm a patient. So we'll say sometimes it'll have preferred. Sometimes it'll have things where it's requiring. And so it's just one of those things where you say, yes, here's what I can do. Here's what I just haven't learned yet. But I'm willing, I'm able, I'm excited about it. And again, don't lie. So if you hate everything having to do with maps, please don't try to work for a map library. You will not like it. And even though you think, well, maybe, no. It's just if you really don't like working with people and you maybe want to be more in technical services, that's fine. But that means that you probably shouldn't apply for a ton of reference positions because you'll have to work a lot with the public. And so if that's not quite your thing, just recognize that. So again, I made this recommendation for the last session that we kind of did. Write a list of everything that you love and that you hate. And if you're not sure of what it is, just as you go through your week, if you have a point where you're smiling, laughing, really happy about something, write down what caused it. And the same with if you're really upset, mad, angry, bored, whatever. So write those down and that'll help you find kind of your pain and elation points. So what you really don't like doing as much and what you're really excited about. Because you're trying to get as many of those elation points into the job as possible. Now, it's never going to be 100%. I mean, everyone says, oh, you should love your job, and you should be great, you should never work a day in your life. That's a lie. You're going to have to work, sorry. It's not always going to be 100% fun. You're going to have some stuff you don't like doing. There's going to be some days where even if you love doing that, you're going to be like, oh, if I see another person, I'm going to scream. It happens, right? Everybody has those days, so there are going to be some times, so it's just good to get as many of those days that are good as possible. So it helps when you're applying to jobs to make sure you're applying to ones that at least look like they'll be fulfilling. Let me go back up. Yeah, and so again here it's going to be talking about, what abilities you've gained, what things you've done. Are you maybe so you saw that you were missing a step, and so I'm currently taking some tutorials, or I'm currently doing some work, so I'm actively working on this. That way by the time I come up for the interview, which I'm sure you're going to give me, I'll be more knowledgeable about it. And so there are ways to put that in too and say, well, I've been doing that, so by the time the in-person interview comes, we can discuss it. You know, other experience, things like that, you know, what kind of things you like doing, you know, and then thank you again. It's never a bad idea to say thank you multiple times, and you should always follow up any correspondence that you hear with a thank you for your time. So if you do a phone interview, if you're talking to someone in HR who's arranging something, if you're talking to the administrative assistant, I mean, I don't care who it is, if you're interacting with anyone, send a thank you, send a follow-up, things like that. And it never hurts sometimes too. So I always recommend, like, after you do your phone interview, because you guys are going to have amazing cover letters, amazing resumes, you're all going to get phone interviews, right? You're going to get called. So they're going to say, okay, we want to have a phone interview. Let's do that. After that, write down their names, write down the positions, send them a quick email as a thank you, and it also helps to make a note of something specific they talked to you about. So a lot of times what will happen is, if you are on a search committee, you're normally going to have certain questions you're going to ask. So you might ask one question and then the following. So say, I really enjoyed that question that you asked and talked to me about, and you know, I thought of this additional thing, or maybe there was this additional resource, or hey, I thought you might like this piece that I remembered reading a while back in some journal. Or maybe, you know, I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer that to your full satisfaction, but, you know, or just, you know, again, something a little bit that pulls back and says, I was paying attention, I was listening, this is important to me. And so you can send those emails, and then you can also send an in-mail card then later. Just again, thank you again for your time, I appreciate it. And sometimes that sounds like overkill, but it's actually not always. Yes?
I don't remember if you talked about this last week or if I made it on my brain. It's very possible. But do you have any questions for us part of the interview? Is it coming on too strong or being too aggressive to ask something like, so what has your company done in the last 5 years to improve diversity? Or what have you done specifically to, you know, increase the number of women that are working in your office? Is that too much?
No, you can actually ask about that. Now, some of that too would be, so I would always recommend looking and seeing if there's any recent news about the wherever you're in, you know, if it's a university, if it's a business, whatever. See if there's news, see if there's mentions, see if they have, because a lot of times they'll have diversity officers, or they'll have other things like that. And I will say too, especially with the library field, there's going to be a lot of women in the field. It's actually a little bit more rare for men. So we're kind of a little different on that field. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to ask. But you should also have, if you've done some research and see maybe there's news, say, oh, I noticed that you just hired, you know, maybe this new provost, or maybe this other thing. Have you noticed that changes maybe the diversity at the university? Or have you noticed? And so if you can link it back to some research, they get really impressed with that. I mean, you can always ask too, just plain without having that, because there may not be any news or information about that. But sometimes if you can say, okay, you know, I noticed maybe you have a chief diversity officer, and then how has that changed maybe how you're doing, you know, diversity, or how you're hiring, or things like that. So
of course, that's just my example questions.
Yeah, I mean, and there's all kinds of things. So I think I actually, when I was interviewing for here, so I was able to talk a little bit about, because both teams were up for the NCAA. And so I was able to say, oh, hey, how about the teams? And, you know, about a little bit, so kind of icebreakers with some of the things. And so, yeah, but you can bring in any kinds of questions for those. And definitely it's not bad to ask. And you should always have, if you have any questions for us, you need to have a question. At least one. And some of it, too, should also be, not necessarily with the phone interview, but then once you get more to the in-person interviews, or possibly even you might just have the Skype or Zoom or whatever. Because a lot of times now, because of budgets and other things, they may not be flying people. They may not be driving. They may be saying, we're going to just interview you for the second interview over, you know, webcam. So you should also look at interactions and how they've been interacting too. And then you want to talk about maybe, so, you know, how are the interactions among staff? How are maybe interdepartmental interactions? Because as hopefully you guys all know, that a lot of universities and stuff are silos. Heck, every business is almost a silo. So you're going to have different ones, and so maybe you can talk about how things within different departments interact, or how things go within the greater community of wherever it is. So those are not necessarily bad questions to talk about. So, did I answer your question? Perfect. Yay. Yeah, so thank you is always good to do, and then, you know, I always kind of sum it up. And so if there is a specific person mentioned in the job ad, or if you can look and find, because sometimes what happens is there's going to be multiple types of job ads. You might find one on Indeed, one on Higher Ed Jobs. Actually, by law, we have to, as a university, publish it in print, I think, in some specific journals. So you can even look there. And so sometimes it'll mention a specific name or research committee chair or something else. Or sometimes if you go to the website, it might say some stuff. So if you can find the name of the chair or specific people on the committee, you can always address it to them. Otherwise, just address it generally for that. All right. Any questions otherwise on the cover letters and resumes?
You mentioned that you have on some sites send, the print version and then the attachment version. Can you, with the print version that's going to HR, give your full one and then more of the attachment be more specific to the job itself, since the print one sometimes they're using, like you said, algorithms to weed out certain things? So
you can do some of that. My normal recommendation would just be whatever you're submitting in the fields is also going to be what's on the one that you're doing for the print. So they should kind of match up. Just because otherwise, if there's inconsistency, they might be like, well, why didn't you give us this information versus... so it's generally just best to fill out everything kind of equally for that. I will also mention it's a really good policy unless they state that they want theirs in a certain format. I actually normally recommend saving things as a PDF. So this is actually PDF, just because otherwise what happens is you're going through, and if they have an older version of Word that doesn't support the text you're using, if they have their margins set differently, if they have, and there's so many things that can throw this off and make it look very weird. I've just seen so many ones where just Word does strange things to it. Or if they upload it then into Google Docs and then Google Docs reinterprets how it should look, because that's always lovely. And sometimes it comes out in Chinese. So PDFs are nice. Again, if they have a specific requirement, follow that requirement. But otherwise, it's really good to have it in PDF form just because that way you know it will always look the same no matter what version they have. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. PDF is also good because sometimes if you use a particular font that's not common on computers, the PDF will literally, it takes a picture of your document and does it, and holds it the way it is. If you send a Word document and they don't have that font on their computer, like you said, it'll just throw the whole thing off, make it look really weird.
And also if you have templates, so like I spent a lot of time putting my template together, and so it can get it to be very funky and with spacing and all kinds of other, you never know what it's going to do, but it's not necessarily going to look nice. So I normally recommend, again, unless you have to, and then if you do have to save it or send it as a doc, it's normally good to send it to at least 3 of your friends, preferably some ones that are not very tech savvy, because they're normally going to have the weirdest settings on their computers. That's what I found. The people that are tech savvy will have kind of things all whatever, but the people that are not tech savvy, they're going to be having the ones where it'll be like, okay, your resume's in Chinese now, and upside down. I'm like, I don't know how you did that, but that's how it happened. So that's kind of good to just send it out. And it doesn't hurt, too, to get another pair of eyes on it, because I always kid that every time I'm in front of a whiteboard or blackboard or whatever, I start writing things, my spelling just goes out the window. So the same thing sometimes happens with resumes and cover letters. You manage to spell some things in ways that it's actually a different word, so it no longer makes sense, but then you're reading through and you just have oh, I said this, so it looks fine, and so it's really easy for you to miss some things that are like, why is she talking about planes? I don't know what that word is supposed to be. So it doesn't hurt to get another set of eyes or 3 on it. And it's always good, too, to look and have someone who is in the field, but also at least 1 or 2 people who are not in the field. That's also good when you're starting to look at reference questions and when you're starting to do interviews. Because what you want to do, and there's so many ones, if you just do a Google search on common reference questions or common interview questions, you'll find a whole list of ones. And be prepared to answer at least those as a minimum, just because you never know what they're going to ask you. There's a lot of the ones that are commonly the same. It's, why did you choose whatever position? Why did you choose whatever institution? Like, what brought you here? Why are you maybe leaving your last position? And so that can also be one of those ones that if it was not a friendly split, you want to have some good answers for some things. And it's just like if you have a gap in your history or if you have some other things, just be ready to explain it. And you can always spin anything, right? So just know ahead of time how you want to talk about it. And you want to go ahead and jot some notes down that you can do, and so that way you're kind of prepared and you've already thought about it. But you do not want to memorize anything. And you also don't want to read anything. Even if it's in the phone interview, you can tell if all of a sudden they go, and the reason I had to break was because you notice that people are reading. It's very obvious. Even more so if you try to do it when you're on a webinar or when you're trying to, do it that. Because it's like, yeah, we can tell you're reading that. Yes, everybody knows. But it's good to kind of get those list of questions, go through, and then have people just quiz you on them. And again, it helps to have at least one person or two people that are not librarians do that, because sometimes you're going to be working, or on the search committee, you'll normally have a few people maybe from the department, but you're also going to have someone from tech services. You're going to have someone from interlibrary loan. Maybe archives is going to be in there. Or depending on how big of if it's a business, you might have other people who have no idea what librarians do. You might have random professors in there if it's with the university. You might have, you don't know who you're going to be interviewing with. And so you can always assume that at least two people in the room have no idea what you're talking about if you go into jargon, and if you just assume that everyone there knows exactly what the job entails. So if I go off on GIS and things like that, people are going to, they're not going to get it. So you really want to make sure that you're not making all these assumptions. This also, if you ever have anything that has, like going back to the GIS example, anytime you're using those acronyms or anything else like that, you always want to make sure that you are first saying it entirely, full out, and then you can use the quotes or the acronyms, not the quotes. Because the last thing you want to do is have a bunch of ones where you're just doing an alphabet soup. Because again, if the people are in the know, they're going to be really impressed because you know all the jargon, you're spot on. Everyone else in the group is going to leave this really weird, like, I don't know what they're talking about, maybe they don't know either. So it's just something good to know. Because most of the time, search committees are just made from these really random groups, just because you have to have so many people and you don't want to have them all in the same department, or you don't have all these other things. Plus also, if you have everyone in reference on the search committee, no one's going to be able to do the reference desk, so it's just going to be this whole mix. So something to keep in mind. All right. Other? Yes.
Sometimes I hear keep resumes to 2 pages. Sometimes you hear it doesn't matter. I know it maybe varies from person to person, but what's your thought? Yes.
Some of that depends, I think, on age and then also how much experience within the field. So, as I mentioned, it's not necessarily a bad thing if you've worked for a retailer, if you've done these other things, to include those. That being said, you probably shouldn't include paragraphs on those. So you shouldn't just include maybe smaller bullet points or just a very brief summary of that. Like here, I could go and I just have like a brief summary of what I did. And I could even shorten that further to just maybe 1 or 2 points with that. You want to spend the most time on the things that are going to be very relevant. And especially so if you go back to my current one, you'll see here, like I have ones that I did, back in 2005 or something. It's just a very short paragraph. But then when you go to ones like where I was at Loyola, I have a whole page of stuff. Just because you don't want to leave out some important things. So I think as you get longer in the field, as you also get older, you're expected to have previous experience that you're bringing. That's the whole value of it. You're not coming fresh. Or in some cases, the value is that you are coming fresh. So again, you want to tailor that based off of the age and the experience. So if you're just starting out, probably just maybe 2 pages is fine. If you've been working for longer and done other things, definitely feel free to include more than 1 page. It also sometimes depends. So sometimes some places will ask for resumes, sometimes they'll ask for CVs. If they're asking for CVs, they normally want a lot more detail. So feel free for CVs to have them be longer. They're kind of expecting it. And that should include presentations, any research, things like that. That doesn't mean that if you haven't done presentations or research, it's terrible, but just know that there's going to be a lot of times where they can be longer. So if it does say resume, you can try keeping it down maybe a little closer to 2 pages, but again, if you have a lot of experience in a lot of things, you don't want to discredit yourself, so it's almost worse to try to narrow that down into 2 pages and then leave out something that might be, oh, that's why we need to hire them. Because I was talking to someone, and they said, yeah, there was this one random line that I debated taking out, and when I was later talking to them, like, oh yeah, that was one of the things, because they really wanted that in the search, but they just hadn't put that as one of the requirements. And so that really helped their chances and got them in one of the interviews. So you never know if that might be the one line where they're like, this is what we have to have. So, yeah, so now that I've terrified you of taking anything off the resume, so yeah, I mean, just kind of tailor and just as you best fit.
Okay.
So I would say if it's going to go maybe like a half sentence over, get it back up. And maybe just trim things, or maybe just look at how your form. You can tweak the formatting a little, especially if you're doing it as a PDF. They won't notice if you move the margins just a little bit. I mean, don't do it so you have margins like this. They will notice that. It kind of looks, yeah, you don't want to mess too much with some of the margins and stuff. But yeah, if it's just like a sentence or two over, try to get that back up. But otherwise, if you have a good amount into the third page or a whole third page, keep it. And once it gets to 3 pages, just let it go however long it goes. It's just going to grow. That they have to have it doing that. And don't forget, keep adding to it as you go along with that master list. So, yes.
Did you include how much you made on
No.
your last? Okay.
You never want to include your salary in your resume or cover letter. So you will include, so for instance here, I can include, like here I was promoted to senior assistant librarian, and those, normally if you're promoted or you get tenure or other things like that, that normally comes with a little salary bump or things like that. Salaries should never be discussed until they're offering you the job. So unless they have it posted somewhere about, like, you'll be making around this salary, and most universities, businesses, and things like that, they do not tell you ahead of time. They're pretty much like, we're just going to randomly let you guess and hope. So you might interview for places and then come in later and they're like, we're going to offer you $20,000 a month. Not likely. Or we're going to offer you $20,000 a year. Very likely. So you might get one of those, and in some cases it's a happy surprise. In some cases it's a, I wasted all of my time because I can't afford to live in this location on that amount. And you can do some research, Glassdoor, some places like that. Public institutions actually normally have to publicize if for people making over a certain amount. So for instance, here at USC, you can actually find what all the librarians are making if they're making $50,000 or more. Now remember, this is before they take all the tax out, so it's really not quite $50,000 at all. They take a lot out. But you can actually search and find out, and so then you can see who may or may not be making that amount at the universities. And then, of course, public universities or private universities are completely different. They don't have to report it, so they don't. But you can sometimes look at Glassdoor or some of the other ones. There's also some different ones where you can look to see what the industry averages in certain areas are, and so you can get kind of a rough ballpark. And it's also good, you normally want to have where they talk about price first. Because otherwise what happens is sometimes you might be going in thinking, okay, I want to get 37, I want to get 37. They're going to offer you 47, but you're like, how about 37? They're like, done. They saved themselves $10,000, right, a year. So they're not going to all of a sudden say, well, no, we were thinking 47. They don't do that. If they can get you for 37, even if they originally budgeted 40, they'll do 40 deal. So keep that in mind.
Are you going to talk about negotiating something?
A little bit, and sometimes you'll have more negotiating room than others. So what happens is a lot of times they'll come in and they'll try to say, well, how much did you make at your last position? And you're like, well, I made about, and you can talk, so if you want to, you can start off with a price, and there's 20 million ways this conversation can go. So sometimes they'll just start off by saying, here's the price that we're looking at, does that fit? And then you can sometimes wiggle that up or down. I probably wouldn't go down, but you never know. And again, you want to look at benefits, because benefits package is a huge part of salary. Huge part. So you want to look at 401k contributions, you want to look at health care, not just how much they take out for it, but actually what the coverage includes, and deductibles and things. And a lot of that stuff you can research by going to the HR web pages. But a lot of times they might come and they might say, well, so maybe how much did you make? And so you can always say, well, it was, it was on par maybe with other institutions in the area. Or so, so you can try to be vague for a little bit. You don't want to play too much with it. And there's a bunch of websites that have some really good tips for kind of looking at different negotiating styles. And just realize, too, that some places won't really be able to negotiate much. So, for instance, public institutions like this, they only have so much wiggle room. They can only offer you so much, and after that, it's like, we can't barter. You know, so I actually took a pay cut to come here because I was so excited about it. And also, it's a lot cheaper to live here than Chicago. So that might be something else, too, where they might be saying, well, we know maybe you're being paid more in Chicago, but also the cost of living and other things like that is here less. And so then you can look at some other things. So yeah, pay is one of those tricky ones where there's a lot of different ways where you can approach it, and some other ways where you can kick yourself afterwards and go, man, why didn't I ask for fill in the blank?
Can you say, how much have you budgeted for this position?
You can. They won't always tell you. Yeah, and you can always, and don't be afraid to ask. I would wait until after they've kind of done some of the offers. You don't want to be asking that kind of question sometimes in some of the interviews, because especially if you're saying, well, you know, is this going to be over 40,000, or, you know, because if you start to look at that number, you might be like, nah, next. So a lot of that is going to be, you want a lot of the budget talk, if possible, you try to talk about once the job offer is on the table, because otherwise it can really go badly sometimes with that. So, yes.
So would the same rules apply for tenure track positions when
I'm sorry?
asking about tenure?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're applying for one, would it be fair to say how long is the process, or?
Definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
You can ask how long is the process. You can ask what exactly is the process, what's included, what are the merits for going for tenure, because every single institution is going to have different tenure requirements. So you can also, what might be good is when you're doing the interviewing, so if tenure is one of those things, you can always say, is there someone I can talk to about the tenure process? So for instance, when I was interviewing here, one of the things that I was doing during my day interview was I was actually talking to someone about the tenure process. And so there was someone that sat down with me and kind of went over a little bit about, here's what the expectations are for this institution, and here's the process. It'll normally take about, you know, you'll be eligible in so many years. Just like with here, they don't have tenure, but they had promotion ones, and they had very set limits as far as after so many years, you can go for this level or you can do that. And so it's not bad to go ahead and talk about those.
Another thing, if you're negotiating a certain salary, they might not also be including certain benefits like, hey, I would like to travel to ALA each year. You guys pay for that. So
yeah, and a lot of
keep
those
that in
things can
mind,
change
too.
too from year to year. So they might be able to do that for the first year, but then maybe afterwards. It's just also not bad to talk about what's the travel budget. What about for, is there anything for professional development? Because that's a lot of times what it's called, it's professional development funds, or the opportunities or chances. Or they may not fund you, but they say, well, we can give you guaranteed paid time off, or something else. So especially, I mean, it depends on the institution. So a lot of times, like if you're working at a, like a public library, they're generally not going to have the funds to send people to ALA, so a lot of that's coming out of their own pocket, but they're normally going to say, well, we'll make sure that you're able to go to maybe one conference a year, or one conference every other year or something. So that's something that you can definitely talk about, is the conferences and proceedings and webinars and workshops, and what kind of professional growth and development can you do. Because that's another huge benefit that you want to look at. And that can all change. So you can have where maybe it's one way, and then you get a new dean in, or you get a new department head, or something else changes, or there's all of a sudden more oversight, or something else, or you have all of a sudden maybe you get some grants, and maybe there is some funds for public libraries, or something else. So you never know what's going to happen 5 years, heck, 2 years down the road. So, but it's not bad to ask about those things.
So I don't know if you came across this in your experience, but imposter syndrome, how do you overcome it?
You never get over imposter syndrome.
I don't. It's like I just got my master's in the mail, and it's like, how did I get this?
You will be working in the field 50 years, and you'll still be like, man,
I'm a fraud.
how do I answer this question? Yeah, I'll still, and I saw those dreams where you were like, someone comes up and I'm like, oh man, I didn't turn my paper in at school. I'm like, I haven't taken class. And I'm like, in high school, I'm like, I haven't been in high school for how many? I'm not going to tell you, I haven't been in high school for how many years? What's going on? You're always going to have that feeling. And so there's going to be some times when it's going to be one of those, I mean, it's just like I teach, and so it's one of those, oh my gosh, I'm going to scar people for life. You know, I'm going to ruin them. This is why I usually want to do teaching, is I'm like, I can like take it and like crush them in a terrible way, and it's not going to be pretty. And that's what I've always been afraid of. Not that I'm planning on doing that, but I'm just like, it's always those nightmares or that imposter syndrome that you're talking about. And so there's always going to be those feelings sometimes of just, I don't know enough, I don't do enough, I don't, you know, whatever else the case may be. And for a lot of those, what helps actually sometimes is look back at your resume, look back at your yearly accomplishments and reviews, look back at kind of things like that and say, I know what I'm doing, I've helped people, this is okay. Breathe in, out, it's all good. Now you will have sometimes too when there's this random reference question where they want to know something very esoteric and things, and you're like, I know this, and I can't remember the database, and that's one of those things saying, I'll get back to you. You don't necessarily have to do everything right in front of the patron. So some of those things is like, you know, I want to make sure that I'm spending quality time, and you can tell this to people. It's like, I want to make sure that I'm really addressing your problem properly. Give me your email, I'll contact you. And most students are appreciative of this. Now, if they're pretty much there, and I've had people come up to me saying, oh yeah, I have an hour before my paper is due where the references. And you have people do that. And I tell students all the time, I'm like, I will not judge you unless you're using Internet Explorer, in which case I totally will judge you. I tell them that too. I'm like, if you're using Explorer, I'm going to judge you. But otherwise, I'm not going to judge. Everyone has been there at some point, right, where you just, stuff happens and you're turning the papers late. I'm like, just tell me when your project's due, because I'm going to find you different resources if it's due in an hour than if you have a month. But yeah, imposter syndrome is one of those things. Oh, and that's another good thing. As you're working, you want to keep a list. So even if you don't necessarily have an annual review, and not just the stuff that you're going to have that you want to put on your resume, you want to keep a list of kind of your accomplishments throughout the year. And whether it's, so some of the things that I'll do is I'll actually mark in my calendar, I'll have a category color that I'll put like a for review, or I'll put like accomplishments or something else like that, so you can keep track, because it's really easy. You get to November, December, and you're like, I don't even remember what happened in May, much less January. You know, you've done so much, you can't remember, did you do that last year, did you do this year, was it 3 years ago? It's really hard sometimes to keep track of stuff and keep track of projects, and so that really helps then just looking back, and some of it with imposter syndrome, just like, I have done so much. But then some of it also just be making sure that you're keeping track and showing how valuable you are. And that's something too, is as librarians, you're always going to be doing assessment. So a lot of that will be of your resources, but then some of it will also be of your position. Because we're one of those jobs where we can't necessarily show and say, hey, we had X amount of people graduate. We had this, or we can't necessarily point to some of those stats because our students are all students. And so we can't just say, well, I had all students graduate. I'm great, you know? It's not how it works. So you have to be able to prove sometimes your value. It's just like with the IT department. They're a cost because people can't see that the server, you know, they know that they buy a lot of things, but they only know if something goes wrong. They're not necessarily when things go right. And it's the same with the libraries. People know when something's wrong when they're not getting the resources they want, when we're not doing things that they're happy with. They can find that out. But then when things are going right, so you don't have to prove your value and prove, and so you're going to have a lot of metrics, a lot of assessment, a lot of things like that. But so it's good to keep account of like, hey, I taught 40 classes last year. And actually I did. I taught 40 classes last year with instruction statistics. I met with so many students, you know, for one-on-one appointments. I did that. You know, I went to these high schools. I did this other stuff. And so you want to kind of keep some lists of that just to, and a lot of times you'll have to do annual accomplishments, or you'll have to do an annual review or something else anyway. So it's helpful for those, but just keep them for yourself. And you always want to keep a copy of your records, not just at work, but you keep a copy of some of those at home. Because you never know when you might want to go through and update that and look at things. And it's always good to have a record so that way you can just, again, back to that master list, keeping all that up to date. So, yes?
Sorry, for instruction positions, especially at academic libraries, do they usually give you the topic that you're going to be presenting on, or do they just say, like, do a one-shot kind of thing of what we think you would normally do in this job?
So you mean like for the instruction sessions?
Isn't that like what most academic libraries want?
Yeah, so for a lot of the instruction sessions, you're going to have a few different things. What you're going to normally have is you're going to have very basic, like, intro English kind of classes, and then you might have something like, here we have a University 101 class. At Loyola, it was called something else, but it was very similar. And so for some of those, you're going to have where is going to try to be taught similarly across all librarians. So you might be saying, hey, we're going to try to make sure that we're talking about Boolean searching, database, keywords and subject terms, popular versus scholarly, so kind of making sure that you have at least these same things are covered across all instances of this course. Because it's like those courses you might have anywhere from 10 to 30 in a semester at least. So a lot of those are going to be very similar because you just want to make sure that all students are getting the same amount of information. So that way, hopefully, all students are at this level. And of course, that's not going to happen. You're going to have students that are too busy doing Facebook or doing whatever, online shopping, just random weird stuff. And so some people are going to. I've actually had one person who sat through 3 classes when I was at Loyola. They're like, hey, this is the 3rd session I've done. It's like, but I wasn't paying attention all the time, so I actually picked up new things in every one. I'm like, well, okay, that worked. So you're going to have some of that where it's just they're not getting it, but then you're trying to at least make sure that you've done it for every class. So they all should have theoretically this base knowledge. Then you're going to have the subject-specific classes, and those ones are really going to be very different. So some of it's going to depend on discipline, the professor, things like that. So I've done ones where I've gone to a stats class before, and we've talked about how to create your own statistic, how to find data sets, how to do all this other stuff, and it was very tailored. And then I've done stats classes for here, where we're taking and we're looking for a research study, and then we're pulling apart how they did it. So looking at the variables, the measurements, and what kind of data, data collection methods were used, and things like that. So you can have things like that. You can have things where I'm going to a computer science class, but I'm talking about business resources because they have to do informational interviews. So a lot of that will be where you're just individually talking with professors, and they're saying, here's what I need you to do. I mean, that's the reason why I'm going to be doing some SPSS basics classes in the spring. Oh, wow. And I'm going to be doing some LaTeX classes. I'm going to be doing some other random workshops because it's going to be ones where the professors have said, hey, it'd be interesting if you could do, or it would help me if you would be able to. So sometimes you end up with really random stuff that you're teaching and doing. I actually was teaching business health and some other resources to a law class when I was at Loyola. So I had this one advanced legal research class that I was helping out every semester with teaching all these different variety of resources that were kind of additional to the normal law ones that they looked at, which they always seem to love. So you never know kind of what you might be doing, and it could be all over the place, and it could be what you originally started with, or it could be the, hey, so I know you've done this for 10 semesters in a row, but now we're going to completely change this and tell you a week before you're supposed to teach it. Hopefully they'll at least tell you a week. So can you, by the way, do this and have that ready for Thursday? Great. So that happens frequently. Or sometimes they'll come up and be like, yeah, so can you teach a class tonight? It starts in an hour. That happens, actually. So most professors are nice enough to give you advance notice. You'll also sometimes have where they'll have you babysit pretty much. So if they're going to a conference, if they're going to be out of town, sometimes they just want a warm body in the room. And sometimes they'll tell you that they just want a warm body in the room. So I've had people tell me up front, I'm going to be going to a conference. I'd love you to come teach them something. And they normally have a specific thing that they'd like me to teach. Sometimes I have actually had them say, I don't care what you talked about. We just need to actually have you set up in class. And it's like, whatever. What's fun is when they don't tell you and then you show up and they're like, oh, yeah, no, the teacher's not here. But yeah, you never know what might be expected. It might change from semester to semester. And also as a liaison, some of the thing is looking for where you can do that. So right now, as a newer librarian to this university, I'm currently trying to go out and I'm trying to say, okay, can I get the syllabi? So I'm talking to the administrative assistants. And I'm saying, can I get copies of the syllabi? Can I get copies of assignments? Can I get anything that I can get to try to see, is there some place where I can fit in, where I can be of use? And then you go to the professor and say, I noticed you have this particular assignment that you do. Would it be helpful if I create a guide for you? Or if I come into the class and talk about how they can use these resources to complete this assignment. And a lot of them haven't thought about that before because maybe they've never done that one. They're like, oh, sure, we can do that. And then sometimes you get to work with them. Sometimes they're like, not interested. So sometimes, in some of the disciplines, they'll pretty much just come up to you and say, okay, I have 30 classes. Here it is. Here's what you'll be teaching. All right. And so you never know. It just really depends on the discipline, the teachers, the institution.
Would it be fair to do that before the interview, though?
What do you mean?
So, like, if there's an announcement that says you're going to be doing U101 before you get to that point where you present your why you're good for the job, but would it be okay to go and talk to people in that department and say, hey, can I get a syllabus for a presentation I'm going to be doing?
I probably wouldn't do it for the
Okay.
interviews, no. Now, what'll often happen is a lot of times if you're doing in-person interviews, they'll normally have, if you're going to be doing instruction. Like I actually had where I had a choice, I think, between a computer science and a chemistry class. Because there's going to be at least 2 of the departments I was going to be working with. And so I actually picked chemistry because I know more with computer science. And they knew I had more computer science background. So I wanted to show that I could do chemistry, which I didn't have as much background with. And that's another good trick, too, is if they offer you a few choices, if you have some really obvious strengths and some other ones, try to go with one you don't have as much strength in so you can really show them how adaptable you are. So I picked a chemistry class. You had to research it. And so I looked and see, okay, what kind of things might they be doing for an assignment? What kind of things might they be doing with this particular research? And then I did an instruction session on it. And so that's very common because they want to see how you're teaching, how you're going about doing things. And I also did a little bit of setup first. And I said, okay, this is, assuming here's the information. So that got to show some of the research that I did before the class started. And so that way before I went to the instruction, I said, okay, here's what I'm going to show. I'm not necessarily going to do these parts because this would involve actual, hands-on work or things like that. But I'm going to go ahead and give you the skeleton, or I'm going to show you this part up to here where I will then stop because that's when we would be doing hands-on work. So you kind of walk through some of this stuff. And I found that really, really good to be able to kind of say, this is what I will be teaching, and then to actually go into the teaching part, because it wasn't necessarily for a chemistry class. And so I wanted to make sure that I was letting them know what the setup would be. And I'm saying, these classes are normally 40 students. They're normally going to have this. I'm never going to have, so here's going to be what you would be having. So. But yeah, you generally don't want to go up to the professors before you've got the position, just because it can make some really weird conversations, especially if you don't end up getting the position, and then the next person who comes in, where they're like, well, but I talked with so-and-so, and yeah, it can get really awkward. I will also say, if you ever go to faculty meetings or other things like that, bring snacks. A lot of times, it's really good to bring the positive reinforcement of the, hi, I'm Christina, I bring you something good, you like me. And because that way they think, okay, sweet, yes, I can associate things with your face that are good things instead of the, you didn't have a database that I wanted, so I'm going to think terrible things about you because you failed me. You failed me. Yeah, you don't want to do that. So it always helps to kind of start off on that positive note. And that is if you get invited to faculty meetings, that can be fun to sneak into sometimes too. But sorry for random things. And you did not fail me, I'm sorry. All right. Other questions, comments, worries, concerns? Anything else you guys have ever wanted to know or didn't want to know? I will also say, too, almost every single job ad that you ever see for a library will have a few things, since we have this one here available. Oh, no, this doesn't have it. But almost every single one nowadays will have something. Oh, this one actually did give a salary. See? It's a unicorn. Yeah, most ones don't give a salary. They will normally tell if they're tenure track or not. Sometimes they include some more information. But they'll normally say, too, you have to be able to lift at least 50 pounds. You have to be able to work in a mold environment, because pretty much every single library is going to have mold if they do not already have it. So there's normally going to be these kind of like common disclaimers. And so just be aware of those. And if any of those are a deal breaker, just remember almost every library is going to have some of those. You can look. Some are going to be a little better or worse than others. So, especially if you're in archives, just expect mold everywhere. Mold is just going to be on everything. Sorry, unless you're maybe digital archives, because the servers don't really get moldy. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. All right. Any other questions that I can answer for you guys? Maybe what time it is. Oh wow. Okay. Sorry, so 40.
I would say the only question is, how much do you see people moving from academic to public, or vice versa, or now we have such a variety of different libraries?
There are a variety. I have noticed there are still some stigmas sometimes attached, and it's not always across every institution, but there are still some. So unfortunately, a lot of the academic ones sometimes have this idea of superiority sometimes above some of the public institutions. So that is fairly common. It's not everywhere, and again, can really depend on the institutions and the people, but there are sometimes that perceived image. And so sometimes it can be harder to move between public and academic, or from public to academic. Not necessarily vice versa. And then sometimes, again, it might be hard to go then into business or special or whatever. So it can sometimes be seen as difficult. It also depends a lot on the job position. So if you're an archivist or if you're something, so there's certain roles where it's not really a problem. And you can pretty much, jump really easily between areas. But there are some other ones where it's just seen because of the people you've been working with, or maybe the problems or other things like that. It might be just seen as different. So sometimes, again, it's not a problem. Every now and then you come across those ones where there's just some of those stigma. So, and I will say, too, the environments are going to be very different. I mentioned in the first kind of mixed session that we did here, that's something else is it'll advertise and say that you're going to be doing, and I think this one like the geoscience and something else. Let's see what the active position. Yeah, so environmental and geosciences liaison. That does not necessarily mean that you'll be doing that for more than a year, or that you'll be doing only that. So you will often have, where all of a sudden, guess what? 2 librarians quit, or 1 got pregnant, or 1 died, unfortunately, which sadly happens. So now you need to be environmental, geosciences, business, and we're going to have you also do nursing. Or, we're going to do other things like that. Or we're shorthanded now at circulation, so can you also learn all the circulation procedures? Or all of a sudden we need someone to interlibrary loan. Or, so you never know what you might be doing, and it's very, very common. That's why most places also have or other duties as assigned, because you will be assigned other duties. You never know what is going to happen. Now, some of that you might do yourself. So, for instance, I wasn't going to mention these, but okay, so I'm the liaison for computer science, chemistry, biochemistry, astronomy, physics, math, statistics, and then I actually just added integrated information technology to that because it was a very natural fit, because one, I have my IT degree, and 2, I already have computer science, and so it was a newish department, and so I was like, well, why don't I go ahead and grab that, because it really fits in. So I actually went after that. But then there might be other times when, again, you're covering, and it might become permanent covering, or might not, or if you get restructured. So you never know going into it how long or what your duties will be by the end of your stay there. So that's just something to be aware of. There's also something to be aware of as you're taking on things. You never know for the length of time. So be careful about what you say yes to and what you look for. So for instance, I'm used to a lot faster pace, because Chicago has a little bit of a different pace than the South does, just a small tad. So I'm used to a lot more going on at all one time. So I'm like, okay, I want to be on committees, I want to be doing this, I want to do that. And I'm like, just take your time. I'm like, well, I don't want to get my time. So you want to kind of go ahead and look and see what you're comfortable with being able to take on. Because if you take on these committees, if you do these other things too, you don't know if that's then going to be, are you doing that for the rest of your life? Or the rest of your time there, at least. And so just make sure that you're comfortable taking on whatever position you're doing. You also want to be careful with saying no sometimes. Because sometimes if you say no, then they're going to say, okay, well, maybe there's another opportunity down the road where maybe you're more equipped to handle it. But they're going to remember, oh, they said no, they're probably not going to want me to offer it this time. So there's a very delicate balance sometimes between extras, yeses, and nos. And then sometimes you won't have a choice, where they'll just be like, you're it, so you just are automatically doing it now, because we don't have any other options. There's also different positions, where some positions will be where you are the librarian. And by that, you're doing interlibrary loan, you're doing circulation, you're doing reserves, you're managing the whole budget, you're doing everything. So sometimes you're going to have those where you're having the smaller libraries and you're pretty much the branch, and you're it. Which makes it really fun if you're trying to get time off. I've had a friend who's done that, and she's like, it's impossible to get any days off. It's like, you can't really close the library if you have the sniffles. So it's just one of those things that looking where you're comfortable with and what you're comfortable with. And you know, do you like being one where you have maybe 12, 15 other people working in the same department? Do you want to be more of where you're kind of managing more? You know, kind of what are your happiness levels as far as what you're doing? in the I don't want to say multitasking because it's really not multitasking. If you do any research on that, there's really like, no, you're doing this one, then you're stopping, then you're doing this one, then you're doing that. So I hate calling it multitasking because it's a lie, but that's the word they give it. So, so just see what your comfort level is. And it's not a bad idea, too, to maybe start with one. And then if you want to take on more, if you want to take on less, you can always move to another library. And that's also one thing that I mentioned the last time is the odds of you finding the position that you're looking for, exactly where and when you're looking for, is going to be very slim. So just keep that in mind when you're job hunting. If you're looking for maybe reference and you're trying to find something in the Carolinas, the only open positions might be out west. Or they might be, you know, overseas or whatever else. So you just might keep that in mind as you're looking for positions that you might have to look a little further or look at a different timeline too. And I'll also reiterate what I mentioned there too, is the way you'll hear back is public libraries will respond first and fastest to any of the interviews or things like that, just because they have the quickest turnaround time that they can do. Then you're normally going to hear from businesses, and then you'll normally hear from academia, and then you'll eventually, 2 years later, hear from government. I had people that were interviewing for government, and they pretty much told you, just get another job while you're waiting, because the time it takes for us to clear you is going to be very long, and you don't want to just be sitting around, right? And the reason is because government, of course, they have that whole clearance that they have to do for most people, depending on the job position that you're looking for. For academia, it's just because with search committees, because you have so many people in different departments, and then once they finally decided, that has to go to the dean, and the dean has to take it to the provost, and I mean, there's all these different chains that it has to go through. Whereas the public libraries, is pretty much it goes to the person in charge, they're like, yes, and then they're done. So if you're applying a bunch of places and you're hoping between a public library job and this academic library job, you're going to hear first from public library. And so just keep that in mind if you're trying to get them around the same time. It's going to be very hard to time them at the same time because it can take 3 to 4 months just to hear back about a phone interview from an academic library. So just because of the process. So I just like everyone to remember that as they're applying for things. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to say everyone should finish up the pizza. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.